Let's get back to COP28. Oh, let's stick with COP28. Kenya's president, William Ruto, looks like the poster boy for Africa at the ongoing UN Climate Summit in the UAE. President Ruto says his country is looking at full-scale renewable energy by the year 2030 as he leads other African leaders to the front lines of the COP28 summit. In the meantime, the Kenya's central bank today raised the country's key lending rate by a whopping 200 basis points to 12.5%. Let's get behind the COP28 and the CBK's rate decisions with Aly-Khan Satchu. Ali is a professional East African markets specialist and a CEO at Rich Management. Great making the time tonight out of London, my friend. It's good to have you on Arise Exchange. Thank you very much.
It's always a pleasure, boss. And
making deals in London, but I'm sure you have your eyes on COP28 on a day-by-day basis. Today is the day 5. What's your take on the discussions, the debates, the deals so far? Talk to me.
So I think, look, it's been a very constructive, convening conference. We know the issue of climate change is affecting Africa most of all. 10 African countries, I think, rank in the top 20 of most affected by climate change. So it's a very real problem. In East Africa, we're seeing the effects of El Nino, the flooding, and so forth. So look, it is a real and present danger. We know about that. What I'm seeing out of this conference is an attempt to get Africa to participate more strongly in the whole climate change program going forward. And I think finally we're seeing some real money being put behind the effort to deal with this challenge. I think President Ruto, as you've said so wittily, is the poster boy, the African poster boy for the whole climate change issue. And I think also has very much been at the forefront. Kenya's fortunate in the sense that we have a huge component of our energy mix is already renewable energy. And, that supports his case.
Interesting. Do you think Africa is pushing the needle so far at COP28? What have you heard so far from the leaders from the EFDP? Akumi Adesina spoke just a few days ago on what is being done. Kenya's President William Ruto spoke very convincingly, leading the rest of African leaders. Then you have Mrs. Suluhu Hassan, the President of Tanzania, despite the disaster that we just saw happen and claiming some lives in Tanzania. She's on the front line as well for Tanzania. So I want you to put all of this together for me. Do you think Africa is making a good show so far at COP28?
Absolutely. All three personalities you mentioned, from the President of the African Development Bank, President of Kenya, President of Tanzania, highly articulate and making the case very strongly and powerfully on behalf of the continent. I think, the continent has an opportunity to snag some quite large funding. The World Bank and others are very keen to involve themselves in this effort on the African continent. So I think those three definitely leading the effort, articulating the challenges. But finally, in the final analysis, it comes down to the money. And I think the World Bank, for example, are very keen to put a lot of money to work. There will be a multiplier effect behind that. However, we have seen some interesting developments. The UAE, for example, has been acquiring forests for carbon credits. And I think what we need to do as a continent is to have not an individualistic approach, country by country, but a continent-wide approach as to how we're going to best leverage this effort behind climate change.
Well, Ali, if you look at Africa today, behind South Africa and Morocco and Egypt, Kenya is pulling all the strings, as it were, targeting all renewable energy by the year 2030, says President Ruto. How feasible is that? Do you think more can be done? Do you think he has a partner in President Suluhu of Tanzania next door to him to pull East Africa, looking at this energy resource that Kenya has, from the Lake Turkana wind to the whole fossil fuel, all of that put together? Do you think President Ruto can take Kenya forward and match money for money and project for projects moving forward?
So that's a very interesting point you're making. Look, I don't discount fossil fuel. I think you need fossil fuel at a minimum base load, and oil is not going away anytime soon, nor is gas. And I think if you really want to industrialize, which we need to do on the continent, you need fossil fuels. That's what's going to drive industrialization. It's the lack of cheap fossil fuels, for example, which is deindustrializing Germany as we speak. So, there is a lot of hyperbole, but the bottom line is you still need fossil fuels. I think Kenya's fortunate in the sense that, we've experimented from some years ago, as you mentioned, Lake Turkana wind. We've been fortunate with the geothermal resource. And when you take those into the mix, definitely they have been supporting our renewables effort. But bear in mind, something like wind, you need the wind, and if you don't have it, you don't have any power. And the second problem is, the redundancy. At times, the grid doesn't need that much energy, and basically that energy is wasted. So, look, we still need fossil fuels. We will continue to need them, but Kenya is a lodestar in the sense that its embrace of renewable energy has been far ahead of the rest of the continent. In the case of Tanzania, I think, we're seeing a more symbiotic relationship between the two presidents. We had a few fallouts with the previous Tanzanian president, who was quite abrasive. I think there's more coordination between the two. And bear in mind that Tanzania has a huge gas resource, which Kenya wants to tap into, and also has significant coal. So it's not just about the renewable story. It's about the optimal mix between fossil fuels and the renewables. And I think Kenya and Tanzania are ahead of the curve in thinking of this. South Africa's challenge is totally different, right? It's a failure to invest in energy. That's really holding them back. They just did not make the investments that were needed for such a big economy ahead of time. And now they're playing catch up and will be playing catch up for the foreseeable future. And you saw that feed into the latest GDP number, which was negative and quite sharply negative. So I think what the lesson to learn from all of this is plan ahead. You can't just go all in on renewables. You've got to have a mix. And really, industrialization requires fossil fuels.
But why are you surprised where we're looking at COP28, Dr. Tuji and the rest of his team, the central bank in Kenya, punch out of the blues today, 200 basis points to 12.5%. Were you surprised? Do you think this is what President Ruto will need to help flagging the economy and a beating shilling?
You're asking a lot of questions there, Person. So firstly, I think, this central bank governors wanted to be ahead of the curve. I think this 200 basis point hike is ahead of the curve. I think he's trying to signal to the markets that he's not going to allow any more shilling weakness. I think really the tolerance level for what's happened with the shilling, which is down about 20% over the last 12 months, is now hitting levels where the policymakers are just very, very uncomfortable, not least because our dollar borrowing means that, the debt to GDP ratio is blowing up in terms of the ratio. So I think he's trying to arrest the slide in the shilling. But of course, as you said, the economy, although it keeps printing 5% GDP numbers, doesn't feel that strong. Employment is down, cost of living is up. So this is going to put further pressure on the economy. But I think they've made a call that really the shilling is the overarching issue and they need to defend it. And I think this is part of that defense strategy to try and attract more money into the country, because really the country has not been attracting money. We've been shut out of the international capital markets. And I think, there's been a big push to make the domestic bonds more attractive, both domestically, but the problem domestically is institutions are limit long. I don't know how much more appetite they've got for Kenya government paper. And therefore, I think you've got to look externally and look at other countries and try and crowd them in. And I think that's part of this strategy of raising interest rates. It was bold, it was punchy, inflation has been relatively stable. And I think, but you've already seen market interest rates move quite dramatically. So in that sense, he's just moving the short-term interest rate in line with market interest rates.
Interesting. Thank you so much for sharing your perspectives and insights with us tonight. As always, Aly-Khan Satchu, professional trader and CEO at Rich Management. Have a wonderful evening.